Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us for this In Conversation event. I'm Miriam Kessling, Events and Engagement Manager at Jerwood Arts, and I'm really pleased to be introducing our event speakers, artist Reman Sadani and curator, cultural strategist and Deputy Director of Delfina Foundation, Salma Tuqan. This online event has been programmed to coincide with our current exhibition, Jerwood FVU Awards 2020 Hindsight, which is now available to experience online alongside further events, content, essays and interviews, as well as the new moving image commissions by Guy Oliver and Reman Sadani. You can find them at www.jerwoodfvuawards.com. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Jerwood FVU Awards, they are a major opportunity for early career moving image artists run in partnership by Jerwood Arts and FVU. The awards support artists within the first 5 years of their practice through a focus on practical commissioning and developmental support. In partnership with Film and Video Umbrella, we launched this initiative in 2012 in response to a need for significant major commissions for early career moving image artists at a pivotal stage in their practice. Through its history, the awards have contributed to an ongoing dialogue around urgent or timely concerns within the moving image, through the curatorial theme and commission works. This and the element of risk in working with artists who are at an early stage in their practice sets the awards apart from other opportunities in the moving image field. And recent awardees include Webb Ellis, Richard Whitby, Maeve Brennan and Imran Peretta. This year's artist was selected from over 220 proposals after a national call for entries. The selected artists each received an award of £25,000, which was used to provide an artist fee and budget to create their proposed artworks, alongside full production support from FVU over a 10-month period. The conversation that you're about to hear was recorded at the start of November in 2020, and it lasts for approximately an hour. We've published it online so that you're able to watch it wherever you are and in your own time. And we developed this event in collaboration with Reman Sadani, and we hope it gives you the chance to hear from her about her ideas and the process behind the new commission Walkout One. Watch snippets of the work, as well as sharing insights and reflections from our special guest speaker, Salma Tuqan. Reman Sadani's Walkout One reflects on how a preoccupation with the past could be considered a privilege when faced with the challenges of the present. Walkout One is set in a city that has been shrouded in dust, setting the film in a post-crisis, desert-like cityscape. The poetic film explores the flaws of a society's single viewpoint, in particular how a dominant ideology can be forced upon a younger generation. In order to lift the cloud of dust, 4 young characters are instructed by an elder who rigidly adheres to a vision, leading to doubts and questions from her followers. The nature of crisis shows that it is often impossible to look back and reflect because of a present, urgent need for survival. The film draws on Sadani's own experience of growing up in Arab countries and later moving to the UK. Various contributors were interviewed about their own ideas of the city, which sparked discussions of flawed systems of authority, collective frustrations, and changing political narratives, all of which helped Walkout One to take shape. Before I hand over to Reman and Salma, I'll take a moment to introduce them both properly to you. So Salma Tuqan is contemporary art and design curator and cultural strategist. She is Deputy Director at Delfina Foundation, a non-profit interdisciplinary foundation dedicated to artistic exchange through global residencies, exhibitions, commissions and public programming. Prior to Delfina Foundation, she held the inaugural role of contemporary Middle East curator at the V&A, where she helped shape programming and laid the foundation for its permanent contemporary Arab art and design collection. Reman Sadani is a London-based Iraqi artist and a graduate of the Slade School of Fine Art. She's a multidisciplinary artist with a focus on film and moving image, and her narratives are often driven by the search for an exit. The physical toll of this constant search manifests in space and performance as the negotiation between the individual and the collective plays out. Recent screenings and group exhibitions include the Independent Iraqi Film Festival in London in 2020, Whole 9 Yards in 2020, Soundings at Raven Row in 2020 in London in 2019, a night of shorts at Set in London in 2018, and no screening at IMT Gallery in London in 2015. So now that I've introduced them both to you, firstly, I'd like to say thank you for joining us, and over to you, Salma and Reman.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for the conversation. I'm really happy that this has been kind of a series of conversations that we've had to get to know you, and also to get to know your practice. But I mean, I think, and what's been interesting for me really is that obviously when you created it, there was no way of kind of foreseeing what this year would look like, and I think it would be interesting to know also for you what this last week has been like. Having audience come and see the film. And the fact that, probably for many reasons, the kind of collective and personal sentiment about some of these subjects around faith, uncertainty has also really been kind of more marked in a way. So I guess I'm curious to know a little bit more about, what were the conversations like this week upon people coming and visiting and seeing the film and relating it to their personal experience over the last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a strange week. So we had 3 preview days, starting with family and friends, and then other people like from the press. I mean, obviously, it's not how I imagined it to be. I think I would have loved to have a big crowd, and I would have loved to have, different, I guess, conversations. But I guess, this week, I mean, obviously people were coming in like groups of 6, and I think people are still trying to navigate, the new restrictions and how we can mix indoors. And I think that did affect, some of the conversations I couldn't necessarily have, because I feel like people are navigating this moment. And I certainly am finding it hard to see the film again, and because I feel like I have a different set of references now, and the uncertainty I think that the film points at is an uncertainty I'm experiencing today, where I'm unable to see what's next, or what can come out of this moment of crisis. So I'm also trying to remind myself and try and exercise what I was trying to do in the film, in the sense of just going back to the present moment, naming the problem, seeing the potential, and like what can come out of this moment, and trying to think of normality not in relation to the past, not in relation to what we knew before, but maybe there could be a new normality, there could be a new potential. So I'm trying to hold onto that as much as possible, but I am feeling the uncertainty. And I think even the people who came to see the show, I think they were trying to, they were trying to, I guess, read it in relation to the uncertainty of this moment. I'm tired of praying for this city to recover every day. I don't know what to pray for anymore. Do I pray for things to return to what they once were? Or can I pray for a new time to begin?
Can you handle change?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in many ways it really does feel like it's holding up a mirror to how we're feeling, but also how we cope with those mechanisms. I mean, the kind of key characters in the film and how they each kind of behave and react in terms of wanting to, look to the future, trying to imagine what that might like, or perhaps being distrustful of it, really kind of feels like it's holding up a mirror to what we're living through. And this exercise, because there's a very practical element that one can take from that, which is an exercise in potentially letting go, and like you said, really focusing much more on the very real kind of issues. But maybe to begin with, I mean, my entry into your work was really nice because I think I told you at first, it was really the podcast you recorded with Guy Oliver, and where you talk about Rey and Harraga music. And so I think my entrance to your work was very much caveated with this interest in movement and escape. And the more that we spoke, the more I got to know a little bit more about your own experiences with migration. So I thought that might be nice for you if you could share just a little bit about your own experience really with movements and with some movement that is kind of forced upon one through, things that are outside of our control, and how you feel about it.
Mm. So, I mean, yeah, I grew up between so many different countries. My parents are originally from Iraq, but they left Iraq in the 90s because of the sanctions that were imposed on Iraq. So they left to Yemen. I was born there, and they just kept moving, from one country to the other, mainly in search of better job opportunities, better living conditions. So that always informed, our migration or our movement from one place to the other. And what was interesting is, I guess, my parents held on to Iraq, and they tried to like almost recreate it in the home. So Iraq was always present, but it was never a tangible place for me and my sisters. Iraq was the Iraq we experienced through food, through the dialect we speak at home, through the music we listen to, my family's stories, but it was never a tangible experience for us in the sense of like attaching it to a place. And yeah, I mean, my family just kept moving, and although I think now growing up, I'm trying to resist it a little bit in the sense of like trying to settle myself and carve out, I guess, a space for me where I could belong, or at least experience some sense of settlement. But I still feel this, natural instinct for movement and to keep moving, to improve one's life, or to improve one's living conditions.
Yeah, it's we both have very similar experiences, I think, of this idea of memory and what's passed down, and the notion of kind of belonging. Because I think, when we last spoke, we ended up having a very nice kind of personal conversation around, again, the construction of a city that's handed down to you and how much you end up clinging to that memory. In my case, my parents are both Palestinian, and my understanding of Palestine was, like you, kind of centered around and formed through a collection of different memories or fictional ideas and, visual cues that I saw through photographs, through albums, through, conversations and snippets. And you end up constructing what is essentially a fictional city, but you're so tightly bound to it. And I feel that, in some ways it kind of features in the film in terms of this idea of, what one kind of clings onto and, at what cost. And at one point, I think in the film, it really talks about the first couple of days of the storm and what was kind of left what was left or lost in that process.
When the dust arrived in the city, we all woke up to the same orange sky. We were all mesmerized. We forgot to mark what appeared and what disappeared. We all forgot to measure our loss. It was only when we saw the orange sky 7 days in a row that we recognized what happened. None of us know when the blue sky disappeared exactly, but it's the only purpose we now share.
But yeah, no, I'd love to hear a little bit more around, that notion of, at what, to what degree do we cling on to those memories and what's lost in that process of holding on to it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, given that we're speaking about, our countries of origin, and like when I think of Iraq, like, I guess, you know, like post 2003, because I mean, you could link, I mean, different people I think would describe the beginning of the crisis in Iraq at different stages. Some would say the 90s, but you know, Iraq went through one crisis after the other, and I think especially post 2003, so many different memories or nostalgias started to emerge, where people started to say, you know, Ya Ret Saddam is still there. I wish if Saddam is still there. Or some people would even say, oh, I wish if we still have an Iraqi kingdom. And people kept, you know, looking back at the past and trying to almost search for that golden history of Iraq as a way to hold on to, like, some sense of normality, or some sense of like Iraq as a functional state. Because I guess, you know, post 2003, especially, the crisis kept unfolding to the point that, you know, the solution was not clear and the way out was not clear. And I think people were too exhausted and too weighed down by the I think the heaviness of the crisis that they were living through, whether people inside their Iraq or outside Iraq, to the point that, yeah, they couldn't imagine a future. You could only hold on to the past. But then you have my generation. You know, I was born in 1995, and you know, especially people who were born, I guess, end of the 80s. We have no access to this past. We have no access to this Iraq that our parents described. So in a way, we can't afford to hold on to this memory. I certainly feel like I'm not at a stage where I can look to the past and hold on to any past, really, because I feel like the world is such a mess that you can only look at the present moment, name the problem, and try and imagine a way out, rather than to hold on to the past. And what's interesting, and I guess in the context of Iraq, is in, you know, October 2019, you start, like, Iraqi youth went out to the street to protest. You know, they wanted to demand basic services. They wanted to demand, I mean, they demanded, you know, like just a functioning state where they have services, they have electricity, they have water. So what they did, I think what was really powerful for me to observe in that moment, even though I was outside Iraq, is that, you know, those young people of my generation were letting go of that narrative of the past, of the golden age of Iraq, and instead they were looking at their present moment and what was stopping, you know, their progress, whether it's corruption or lack of services or foreign intervention in the country. And they simply, you know, wanted to demand solutions to fix the present moment, so they can afford then like a space or time where they can imagine this future Iraq. But certainly no one can afford holding on to that past. And when I think, I mean, of the narrative of the film, it's a bit of a similar situation, because, you know, the dust arrives in the city and just settles over the city, almost like, yeah, concealing the parameters of the city, so everything is blurred. And I guess, you know, the what they hold on to is the memory of the blue sky, the memory of what was lost. But then that means that informs their desire for recovery, in the sense that the way they want this, in the sense, like, their sense of like returning back to normality is by looking at this image of the past, of like the blue sky that was once there, and then that informs their I guess what they do, or like the solutions they come up with. And I had a problem with that, because I'm like, how, like, in a moment of crisis, can we afford looking back to the past? I mean, I understand why one would do that, because sometimes the past, you know, that's your only image of normality, maybe, before the disruption happens. And I can understand why people look towards that for comfort. But then, can it inform our solutions? Can it inform how we move forward?
The sky is not listening.
Why do you expect it to listen? We're asked to clear our intentions, but our words are never in sync. We look in different directions, even when our eyes are closed. And if the sky gives us a route and we succeed, the thrill of commitment to a group, to a city, would just end. None of us want the sky to listen. I like this dust. It's the only thing that I recognize. It's the only thing that dares to be seen and touched. That's complicit.
It's a protest.
If that answers your question.
You know, it does. And I think you see that play out also in the film in different characters. There's some that, you know, I think are replaying this idea of, you know, being distrustful potentially of it. The horizon is a future, is a false promise. And others that, you know, perhaps are more likely or more willing to kind of shed that kind of burden. I think we've talked a lot about this idea of memory and how it's associated also to cities that we come from, and also that its relationship, I think, for you to the idea of, you know, the Arab road film and that interest that you have in the genre, that, you know, what you've talked about is, you know, this fascination with this genre where you find that there's a big difference in terms of Western road films and for example, Arab road films, with this kind of, in the case of Arab road film, being far more concerned with what you're leaving behind and being, I levied maybe the responsibility of kind of remembering and holding on in a very symbolic way to what's being left behind, rather than looking forward, or rather than being given that space to kind of reflect or imagine or indulge. So it's interesting that from your perspective, again, you know, it feels as if there isn't, or from what you've said, there shouldn't really be that space. It's a luxury really to be able to kind of hold on to the past. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to know more a little bit about this kind of fascination that you talk about with Arab road films. And I think you have some examples that you'd kind of looked at in the past as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up watching, I guess, Western road films. And you know, they're often, I guess, informed by this sense of individualism or this idea of the open road with endless possibilities. And that was never my experience as a woman and as a holder of an Iraqi passport. You know, like the most spontaneous trip that my family once like tried to do. We were traveling in Syria, and all of a sudden they wanted to go to Beirut. And the journey didn't last longer than 20 minutes because we hopped onto a car to drive us to the borders. And the driver got curious. So he was like, how are you going to get there? Do you have visa or stamps? We were like, oh, we would just get it, you know, at the border control. He was like, no way. You need to apply through the embassy. It takes weeks. So in a way, like even, and I really... And I just really remember that moment. I'm like, oh, even that moment when you try to be spontaneous or you try to journey and move through space, you're faced with these restrictions and these borders and the weight of even the identity papers that you hold. So like going back to the idea of like Arab road films, I'm at a very, very early stage in like researching, I guess, the genre of the road film in Arab cinema. But I'm particularly interested because I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm interested in like what kind of journeys are the filmmakers trying to depict, and what I'm finding so far, like I'm finding different sorts of journeys where one of them, for instance, is like the journey where the protagonist ends up on the road in search of something missing. So for instance, like there's a film by Azza Al-Hassan called Kings and Extras, and it's a documentary, and she's basically, the film follows the trail of this missing PLO film archive. So she ends up, you know, traveling different cities in search of this missing film archive. And then there's like this other journey where I guess the protagonist is trying to negotiate borders and restrictions. There's an amazing film, it's a short actually, by Anne-Marie Jassir, called Like 20 Impossibles. And it's a great film because it's a fictional film. So it follows a film crew traveling between different, Palestinian cities, and they keep getting stopped, by border control or by checkpoints. Sorry. And there's one point when like an Israeli checkpoint stops them, and you have, you see different experiences, because one of like the filmmaker has an American passport, so they kind of don't touch her, they just leave her in the car. There's this other person who's an Arab, like with Palestinian papers, so he's taken for interrogation. Then there's the like an Arab with an Israeli
ID.
ID, and he gets taken somewhere else. And what happens visually, like, or even like in terms of the experience of the film, so like the sound recorder is the guy with the Israeli the Israeli papers, and he gets taken to one place, and he takes all the sound equipment with him. So what you're experiencing in that moment is like the camera is filming from like a quite fixed position, but the sound is coming from this other point. And the actor who's meant to be in this film is taken to another point for interrogation. So you just have this fragmentation of the journey, but also, I guess, depicting the fragmentation of the Palestinian narrative. And yeah, there are many examples of like Arab road films and what happens. And there's this other one where the journey gets interrupted, in the sense, there's a Syrian film called Al Hudud, or Borders, where the protagonist travels from point A to B, and he loses his identity papers on the way. So he just keeps going back and forth, and no one accepts to let him in. So he ends up building like a shack on the border line, and he just occupies, this in-between space, and becomes stateless. And this element of like carrying the weight of the cities, or what you leave behind, with you on the journey. I guess that's my own interpretation of some of those films. And I mean, even with like Anne-Marie Jassir's film, like this thing, the weight of the identity paper that you carry and how that informs your journey. That in itself is like a big weight you have to carry with you in the journey. So you're never able to enjoy the openness of the road. The road is punctuated by restrictions and borders.
Yeah, and also replays this idea of the in-between space, which features heavily in the film, of neither being, clinging onto the past and not being able to see the future, and also kind of speaks to the same, the migrant experience to some degree, this kind of in-between, where even the destination sometimes being unclear, but even when you reach there, you somehow still have a foot in both spaces as well.
Yeah. And that certainly has been always my experience, in the sense I always feel like I carry multiple spaces with me. Like, for instance, there is this space that's, Iraq, in the sense of like this space that's far away, yet you carry it in your accent and the food you eat and your skin, identity papers. And there's the space that you reside in, that you don't necessarily belong to, but you're in a constant process of getting to know. Yeah, you end up carrying these multiple spaces and unable to settle, unable to...
Yeah, and this constant negotiation. I think that's why I found it very interesting, that the choice that you did to focus, during the podcast on, the types of music that has also traveled with people, Rey and Harraga, which maybe you can talk a little bit more about, where it came from, what it speaks about, what's at the core of it. But it very much speaks to this idea of a fusion of sorts, or something that also evolves according to it, its mobility as well, and its influences.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that podcast, because I guess I was I think it came at a time when I was trying to reflect on my own identity as a migrant and my own experience. And what was interesting in most of like this migrant music, is that it's like it opens a space for, like, I don't know, linguistic hybridity, in the sense, for instance, rhyme music actually is known for that, where you have Arabic, English, French, sometimes even Italian, and you just have this, like, new space that opens up, or like the migrant opens up, where they're trying to reach out to the other, the Western other, and they're also trying to, I guess, express themselves, or they're trying to express the place they come from, but it's never like a what I enjoy about it, it's like it's not about this binary or this divide of like East and West. It's an in-between space that they're occupying often. And with rhyme music, I mean, rhyme music, you know, it started in Algeria in the 20s or like 30s in Oran. And Rai literally means opinion, and it's an incredible music, that's kept evolving, and it's traveled with the migrant community to France and other places. And I guess we spoke as well about like al-Harraga videos in relation to like rhyme music, because I came once across this academic paper by someone called Hydran Fries, who looks at the development of Rai and al-Harraga videos as a way to understand the migrant identity. And al-Harraga basically refers to the North African migrants who are traveling to Europe, often in boats. And the videos are just incredible because the movement itself started in the 80s, but I guess now with like access to internet, and now that everyone has phones, you started to see these videos of the travelers, I guess, documenting their journeys in boats to Europe. And I don't want to romanticize the journeys, because, you know, the journeys are very precarious. Some people end up drowning, but the videos you see online are amazing, because they either capture the point of arrival to the shore, or sometimes they're selfie videos just showing like the travelers and everyone else on the boat. And what's beautiful about them is that they bring like a sense of subjectivity and agency, in the sense that we got used to seeing, you know, images of migrants often, you know, shot from far away from the position of the onlooker. But it's amazing to be reminded of the travelers themselves and the way they're documenting their journeys. I mean, they are like defying, you know, rules of mobility, and they are also, I guess, they're also rejecting, you know, the sense of hopelessness or the lack of opportunities in the places they come from, and they're trying to choose, you know, this travel or this journey as a way to improve their life, and as a way to have, you know, new opportunities. Sorry if I'm not making sense. I feel like
no, you are. I mean, they are incredible. I mean, both, again, the sort of agency of them and also heartbreaking at the same time. I mean, seeing some of the films that have been shot on the kind of pinnacle of, you can see joy, relief, and so many other emotions, only to be turned back. They are so emotionally charged and human, basically. But I was thinking also about, you know, this idea that of kind of the in-between zone, and also, I suppose, what language one chooses then when you're in that space of either, you know, not fully fitting into kind of one or the other. Because I think one of the things we also talked about is the fact that with the film, you're purposefully not locating it in any specific city. There's nothing that really gives it away. There's nothing that gives away also what kind of moment we're in. Whether it's contemporary, whether it's set in the future, even the language that's used is, you know, feels loaded. It feels of another sort of time, to be honest. So
the horizon is a false promise. When you think you've arrived there, you discover the world doesn't end. It falls away again.
You've been there?
No. But that's what the elders say.
They say a lot of things in the city.
I know. I asked my mother the other day if the sky is blue in heaven. She said she didn't know. She said the sky is what rises and ascends. We only see what we can reach.
Yeah, I guess from your perspective, that those decisions is to, you know, to really kind of pare down in a way the set, the type of language that is also used, and the fact that it's not located anywhere specific, that anyone can, you know, on some levels, people would be able to kind of identify with it in a very personal way rather than locating it somewhere very specific.
I mean, I feel like I'm still also trying to find my language in film, in the sense that sorry, I know that like the language that's used in the film doesn't have any locality, if that makes sense. It's just you know, they're describing the state they're in, they're describing the conditions, but it's hard to pin down, you know, even like where this language is coming from, or where the characters themselves come from. Because yeah, I think it's my own experience of like language, in the sense that yeah, I know that my language doesn't have like a specific locality, and it's yeah, which therefore means like it was hard for me to locate the narrative or like fix it to a geographic space. So the city is unnamed, I think, again because I wanted to maybe make it more accessible, and I wanted to refuse, you know, any restriction or any decision, I guess, to fix it to a specific space. But also, I mean, like when you think of the characters, I mean, the characters, none of them like speak from the position of I or the position of the subject. They're still locating that, and even though like in the dialogue, I mean, the film opens with this phrase, "I feel that I'm stuck," somewhere between memory and hope. And then there's this other scene where the character performed by Natasha, she says, "I like this dust. It's the only thing I recognize." So in a way, the I, or like the position of the subject is not necessarily active. They're either stuck or they're conforming, but they haven't necessarily located their position in any of this. And I feel like it's informed by me, in the sense of like, yeah, also me as the maker of this work. I'm still trying to establish my position and find my language. And maybe at this stage, the only thing I could make are these like fragments of experiences and images and even language.
Yeah, I'm so curious. I remember when you first told me that film wasn't the first media that you came to. It was painting and sculpture beforehand. You know, how what the kind of trigger was for you to kind of move into working with film, and in a sense, you know, what was your work like before embarking on an altogether different media?
Yeah. I used to paint and make sculptures, but yeah, everything changed, I guess, in June 2014, and it was a funny time because I was in New York at the time, and I was preparing to I guess move to London to start my art degree, and ISIS went into Mosul, the city where my family comes from. And yeah, for some reason, I think I felt very threatened in that moment. It felt like part of my identity or my sense of who I am was threatened. And yeah, I remember like looking at my paintings and sculptures and not being able to relate to any of them, or not being able to even access that medium. And the only thing I could do was to hold the camera. I had my BlackBerry phone, and I just started just documenting that period, I guess, where me and my mom at the time were just experiencing, I guess, this threat to the city of Mosul from far, but also us having to, I guess, us also receiving all these like voice notes and calls and messages from our family back home in Mosul. So we were engaging with what's going on, we were living it, but also we were far, and all this feeling of guilt, and holding the camera just gave me some sense of order. It felt like everything became so chaotic. I lost my set of references in that moment, and the camera felt like such a strong tool to just give that chaos some sense of order. So I started, I guess, making almost, I guess, documentary films, or I mean, they were more like film essays. And then I slowly, when I then moved to London and started my art degree, I started experimenting with performance, with fictional elements. But yeah, it all started from a moment of fear, I guess, and threat.
Yeah, and trying to make sense of what's around. Yeah. And I mean, another note that I wanted to ask you about was the kind of use of sand, the multiple kind of uses of sand within the film, and some of what you've kind of talked about previously in terms of it being, it's used, or it's a much more kind of brutal way of it being used in terms of the language or connotation. Or kind of weaponization of sand, and to throw dust, and the terms that are, or sentences that are used, or phrases that are used to basically carry that, throwing dust in one's eyes, etc. If you could.
It's not your sandbags. It's not your sweat that reaches the sky. It's your will.
Part your clouds and open your gentle route. We came to be near you, we come to clear you. We ask for no journey but the one to you. We ask for no route but the one to you. We ask for no journey but the one to you. We ask for no route but the one to you. We ask for no journey but the one to you. We ask for no route but the one to you. We ask for no journey but the one to you.
So I mean, it all started actually with some research I was doing at the time before writing the screenplay, where I was looking into like the relationship between the city and the desert in film, and I was very interested in this I guess almost outsider fantasy of the desert as this open, timeless space where, you'd see many narratives where the city person, runs away from the chaos of the city to the desert. And I was very interested in just that relationship and that landscape. And then I became more interested in sand as a material, where I guess sand, sand as a surface is like it refuses to mark the passage of time because it's always moving. It's an unstable surface. And there was something interesting in that, in that, I guess, that nature of sand, in terms of like almost marking the passage of time through movement, or by moving through space, or by occupying different, spatio-temporalities. And so it refuses to be still, and it refuses to hold on to the memory of time. It just marks it maybe through movement and change. So I became, more engaged, I guess, with sand as a material. And I came across this, I guess, phrase, to throw sand in the eyes. And I found out that it's actually like it has a military, like its origins are in military operations, where sand would often be used to create like a smoke-like screen to conceal military operations. And from there, I became interested in this relationship between sand and vision, and this potential to conceal or even deceive. And I guess, out of those fragments, the narrative came about, where where I just thought, how about having the dust, or like the sand, I guess, travel to the city and just, settle over it and disrupt the city, because I guess the city, or like the urban desires are like the city is a space, like we love order, we like to discipline things, we like to order space, time, and inhabitants, but there's something disruptive that I guess sand carries, and I just wanted to exercise how that would look like in a city.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put. And it again keeps kind of reiterating many of these kind of questions around movement and time passing, and also the act of kind of letting go. It's and also the kind of rituals that end up ensuing in the film as well, which I think, to some degree, many I guess many people can kind of relate to, in terms of the moment we're in, where the marker of time is very much decreed at the moment by rituals that we enact in our day-to-day, to actually mark in a way days passing. All of us have found solace or created some sense of order through our own rituals, whether that's exercise, whether that's taking on a new hobby. But there's things that I think people have now kind of clung to as a way of kind of marking how the days are passing. So yeah, in terms of kind of the rituals and within the film, maybe you can talk a little bit more about those.
Yeah, because I guess the rituals, we see are just in terms of how you're describing this current moment. The rituals where we see are like either they're waving those webs in the air to catch the sand grains or the dust from the air and collect it in bags, then take it to build those dunes. So in a way, they're almost like trying to find some sense of order, or they're trying to discipline or order the crisis itself by handling the sand materially. But then also like the sand dunes start to like fall, and we have this scene where the like sand starts trickling down, as if reminding them that none of these methods or tools are right.
Yeah, I think that seems like a very nice kind of, it feels like a nice way to end, because it goes back to, I think, the starting point of the conversation around, there seems like there's a lot in this film. There's obviously a lot to unpack, but there's also a lot in this film that can teach us about the present moment. And of course, a lot that's very personal to you, but also that I think is very collective and very human, really, about how we cope in moments of paralysis, about uncertainty around what we choose to let go of and at what cost, and faith, of course, being a central component, what's predestined, and what is our own agency and choice. But so yeah, I just wanted to say thanks. It's been so nice to get to know you and to speak.
Thank you so much, Salma, and thank you for how you, I guess, invited me to reflect as well on my background and and the wider practice. And we haven't met face to face yet.
Yeah, soon.
It's very nice to know you virtually and over the phone, and it's beautiful as well to see how like our experiences are are a bit similar.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's a lot that was for me triggered from the film, about my own kind of personal background, and also maybe what I've grappled with and continue to grapple with as well. So it felt very, also cathartic, I'd have to say.
But can we ever achieve that?
No, that's going to be the test, but I hope we can meet in person soon.
I hope so. Thank you so much, Salma.